Coils and Slinkies, this is internet personality Vangelus, and fresh third-party company Open End Play dropped their debut piece in the form of Big Spring, a big springer in a shoebox-style container that is meant to be opened up and played with. That's why their name is, you know, that's why his name's, you get it. Big Spring is a tall, athletic robot with slender leg lines and bulk in his chest and shoulders. He is a hell of springer, and he's the right size and colors to be all masterpiece alike too, if that's your bag. I think his back end cleans up real darn well, and all of his shapes form into a silhouette I really dig from almost every angle. His helmet looks real good too. Unfortunately, his face is comically terrible. It's flat and cheekless, overly smooth to a mannequin degree, with squinty eyes and pursed lips. It can come off. Hopefully, somehow and someday, I'll be able to install a better face sculpt in its place. The face on the box art even would be an improvement. Some people are modding Masterpiece grapple faces to go in there. Anyway, while I personally prefer the wraparound shoulder pad look, there is an option to rotate these things 90 degrees and spread them on the back of Big Spring's upper arms. This shot's for you, IanHardReturn.net. As for accessories, let's start with the wet noodle. Big Spring comes with a very topical football torpedo, which has a solid sculpt. It also has no paint, no solid way to be held, and no obvious location to be stored in any of his 3 modes. I usually just leave it in the box. Moving on, there's also a sword and back-mounted sheath. The sheath grips a tad tightly, making me worry about the silver paint on the blade at times, but it works. There's also a gun. Unfortunately, the sword and gun both have solid cylinder handles, and Big Spring is not very good at holding on to them. Ratchet joint vibrations often jostle the weapons loose, and I'm astounded at the lack of palm tabs or any other locking mechanism. You can just pose the figure and then put the weapons into place, but extra work while playing with my toys? Blah. Big Spring's got a ball socket neck, so he can tilt a bit, look around a bit. His helmet bumps into stuff a little bit, and then the base of his neck is on a hinge, so he can pump it. He can pump it, baby. Pump, 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 pump! Back to regular people's business, his shoulders, if you hold onto his chest like this, have super solid and heavily teethed detents for going forwards and backwards, simple hinge for going outwards, and there's another hinge right down here if you want to do those kind of things and get his shoulder axis position to move up and down or forwards and backwards. He's got a bicep swivel, double jointed elbow. It's a great bend, even though this thing can bump into his cuff, but that's kind of by design. His wrists can swivel, his fingers can open. At the knuckle, it's just a single joint, and then the way that his fingers are jointed is that they've got the thing where there's a trigger finger, and I don't like that much because his gun is just, it's got a cylinder peg for a handle. You don't actually need this. This maybe looks okay as a come here, but that's it. Doesn't look good at pointing at all. Like, what is this? Big Spring's also got a waist joint, and then I keep holding on to this, right? That's because if you move his arms backwards, everything's fine. You move them forwards, and this happens. This lock here doesn't work on mine. It seems to be a common problem, though a few people have said they've gotten it to work. I've tried everything, man. I've even tried floor polish on another copy of this toy. It just didn't do it. It just comes apart. This is a critical flaw, man. It has a small silver lining, which I'm getting more accustomed to. If you fold this in, this actually works as an ab crunch pretty well. Pretty darn well. It's tight enough to hold the whole weight of the toy up. You just have to deal with that stuff. Like, it's not even pulling the whole chest open. It comes up this far, and if you let go, it more or less works itself back down as you complete the posing of this guy. But I just don't know. Something about the geometry and the fact it's just like 2 square pegs for the most part. This should have been a big C-clip. If this can be a big C-clip, spoilers, that should have been a big C-clip. His forward-backward hip motion, by the way, is a lovely ratchet joint, and it takes the hip skirt detail up into the crotch with it, which I think is a really cool solution to maintain this look and have full articulation. It's also ratchety when it goes outwards. He can sit between 2 trucks if you really want him to look like a badass. There is a dedicated thigh swivel up here. He's got a knee joint that's also detented and pulls a decent amount of curl. And then down here in Footsville, you can kick his foot forward a little bit, back even less, and then tilt it real darn well. So he can stand pretty solidly. The one and only problem I have with this guy from the waist down is that this is kind of his natural stance for the most part. If you click these in to a more relaxed position, these wheels collide. Now, they don't prevent him from standing like this, but if you put him, in a nice calm stance like this, the tires of those wheels are basically rubbing against each other and holding his legs apart slightly. It's not like a terrible thing, but this is like super close to being a really good below-the-belt articulation system. Articulation overall is pretty darn good. It's just really ball and chained around the ankle by that. I'm going to transform this guy into his helicopter mode first, and while I do that, I've got to point out that there were 0 instructions included or available when Big Spring first dropped at TFCon Toronto 2017. It's not a hard conversion scheme, but it has a few ideas that operate outside of the usual box. But man, am I into what the legs get up to. This is probably a good 60% of the meat of the transformation, and it is worth it. Lots of big, simple motions, and the only complication comes in the form of the lack of instructions. There are a couple of little locking tabs and slider parts that could be very confusing if you go in blind, but thankfully, once you know they are there, the process is anything but a trial. And then, big hidden mid-thigh C-clips. Delicious. Unfortunately, the less delicious big comes in the form of these double-folded green flaps, which have 2 different tab connections, but generally can only make use of one, and the other just pops right back out. So, the panels tend to just pop back out. Oh well. Rotating the leg pieces around to unify them into the vehicular tail section involves some clever, if unconventional, uses of joints to have chunks of big springs slide around and lock into place. Some of these bits can slide independently, which isn't immediately obvious and would have been great to hear about in some kind of provided instructions. The arm and shoulder transformation makes use of some pretty clear locking tabs, so it isn't too hard to figure out how it all works. At worst, you might have to do some trial and error until everything fits together properly. However, with the canopy, you will want to partly unfold the hidden car canopy stuff in order to close it up tightly. Store the sword sheath attachment in there while you're at it, and then unfold the sword, plug it into the roof, give it a spin or two for luck, and whoop-a-dup, it's choppa time! Big Spring's flight mode is a big hefty hunk of angular armored whirly-bird, beefed out to an 80s sci-fi excess and certainly not subtle in any way, shape, or form. I really like it. The shapes are strong, the robot mode parts are nicely hidden and integrated, except for the head down there. And while there's no landing gear, the car mode tires are all aligned to roll happily when this mode's on the ground. Did I mention that the chopper blades can spin like a mothercopter? Now, all that said, this mode is also capital P plump. You can start at the front, proceed towards the middle, and suddenly you're at the end. This aesthetic is going to carry over to the car mode, where I'll have more to say about it, but this is definitely a point of contention among fans, and a triple point of contention among fans who wave line art and screen caps at each other. The gun has a dedicated hexagonal peg port on one side of this mode, but the football missile has nowhere to go that I'm aware of. I've tried to stuff it into the quote-unquote cockpit, and no dice, dog! There are also some flip-up spotlight dealies, but those are more meant for work on the land. Let me pull off these weapons so that we can make our way over to the car mode. The arms and shoulders kinda switch from Formation A to Formation B in just about every way and every place that they can, along with the outer edges of the robot chest. Once again, this is all twice as difficult out of the box due to the lack of instructions. Just remember to slide the entire shoulder assembly forward. There are clear tabs and slots for everything, especially if you've already identified which ones didn't get used in the robot or helicopter modes. Squishing up the chopper tail into the car butt is pretty simple, but there's one specific move that might be weird to hear about. You need to slide apart the lower half of the back while leaving the upper half in place and tabbed together. One more thing to add to the obvious when I see how it's supposed to work list. Finally, in one of the highlights of this entire figure, expand the cockpit window and flip up the filler piece to straight up morph it from one shape to another. This trick, god damn it, I want to see on more toys in general. How friggin' cool is it that the cockpit changes size between both vehicle modes? Like, it's an excellent touch. I'll get my gushing about that out of my system here and now. Look, they're even side by side. It changed shape, it's magic. Anyway, Big Spring's car mode has the battering ram frontal shape you'd expect from a land-bound Springer. Big and wide up front, and thanks to the plumpness of Open and Play's version, an equal level of width in back. This is where I'm real cool with the squat, toy-like aesthetic of this guy, because I hate how line art Springer's car mode tapers into a spindly strip on its back half. I don't care about accuracy in this case. A Springer car that maintains its width from front to back gets massive bonus points from me. It also helps when the rubberized wheels all roll happily, and the vehicle's size has the right level of palm-filling hand feel. If you snag the sheath attachment from inside the cockpit, you can store both of Big Spring's weapons on this mode if you're cool with roof swords. No good news on the football missile front though. Leave that thing in the box. But flip up the headlights, that's good fun. They could use a little, well, any detailing, but I like that they are there. Because if someone makes a piece of detailing I could stick onto the front of those little headlights, then the world is my Big Spring oyster. By the way, it's here that I'm gonna throw down a big aesthetic demerit on the hood chest of Big Spring. Look at that big, ugly glued seam running down the middle. Look at how it screws with the yellow grill's bottom edge. This is a baffling construction design decision, as I can't really tell what's been gained, but oh, can I see what's been lost. Big Spring's a fun but flawed piece in general. From that seam, to the unbelievably poor locking tabs on his bot mode belly, to the sad inability to maintain a solid grip on his weapons, to his face. He fights back with a damn fun transformation, doubly so for doing so while being a triple changer masterpiece alike. He's also got solid articulation with some beefy joint quality, a lovely and satisfying size, and most of all, a competitive price. This guy runs under 100 American bucks and under 100 Canadian bucks when I picked up a fresh one at TFCon Toronto 2017. He's got the kind of price that actively combats me on nitpicking many of his flaws, though the lacking belly tab and poor weapon grippage are a combo of faults where I can maybe ignore one for the cost but not the other. Regardless, as a toy built to pick up and play with, more so than a screen-perfect masterpiece alike, even though his size and aesthetic is certainly dipping its toe into that market, I'm overall happy with Big Spring, especially when I went insane and installed magnets into him to further hold his robot chest together. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and there sure are a lot of photos of Masterpiece Grapple's face swaps forcefully installed on this guy. I did plug in some magnets, but I don't want to mess up my grapple, or his spare faces.